Hi everyone, Jim of Shiloh Kahal. I want to talk about and uh, affirm what we mean by evening in this discussion of when the day starts, because it looks like it's a moving target depending upon who we're talking to. So let me just start by I've got an outline here I put together. What, and when is evening when determining a calendar day in the Hebrew or Enoch or Zadok calendars. In all of those calendars, what is evening as it relates to the transfer of one day to the next, from, say, day 6 of a week to day 7 of a week? If evening is the start point of the new day, then when is that? What does that literally mean? And I assert that defining an evening and a morning, quite frankly, in this discussion is fundamental to any assertion of when a day starts. So let's begin. With evening, I've come up with some evening definitions. First of all, colloquially, meaning that common use in most, or at least our culture and society, evening could be, it's a very broad, it's just very broad. It can mean a lot of things. I would say that it usually includes an extended period of time that could begin in late afternoon before the sun even approaches potentially before the sun even approaches the horizon. And it could extend, forgive me, it could extend to or past dusk, which is, after the sun has gone down and even after twilight. Dusk is the point where all the light disappears and we end up with night. Well, some people still are calling that evening. So potentially we have this long, extended period of time that could be called an evening, but that would not help us in this discussion. Colloquially, it makes sense. We all use evening, and that's fine. But in our discussion, we needed to be more specific. Now, here are the options that I've identified so far, and I invite anybody with new perspectives or unique perspectives on what I'm saying. I invite you to make comments and, contact me in whatever way, because if there's more information that I need to incorporate into my evaluation, I want it. But this is where I'm at right now. Here are the options when we talk about evening. It could be the moment when the sun's entire orb touches the horizon but has not begun its descent below. None of the sun is yet obscured. Let me see if I can give you a visual of it. Now, I'm using my own photos and they're not the highest quality, but the idea is to just give you visuals of what I'm talking about. So here is the sun. Let's call this the horizon. Let's pretend the sun's not all the way touching the horizon, but let's say that these trees here, if you can see this is the horizon. As soon as that sun, the bottom part of that orb, touches the horizon, that could be one of the options for when the day starts. It touches the horizon, boom. Well, here, let me say this again. So the orb is above the horizon. It's day 6. It touches the horizon, boom. We enter day 7. The next alternative would be when the sun's entire, sorry, I'm going to clean up as I go. I don't mean to do that. The moment that the sun's entire orb disappears below the horizon and becomes completely obscured and not visible. And then a twilight period of time ensues or follows that. Once the sun has gone down, well, first of all, as the sun's going down, you can see that the light of the sky is waning. But once the sun goes down, then we enter a twilight period of time. So just to reiterate, the second option is the moment the sun's entire orb disappears below the horizon and becomes completely obscured and not visible, at which time a twilight period ensues. Now, let me give you a visual of that. Again, it's my own photo, and it's not from the same sequence that I had the other photo, but you get the idea. Here's the sky, this is the west, and the sun has gone down. Let's pretend this is the horizon, and the sun is right at the point where it is getting ready to completely disappear. Now, let me see if I can tell. I can't really tell if the orb is up there or if that's just brightness. Wouldn't really matter. the point would be that at this moment in time, once it goes down, then that is the transfer of the day. So while the sun is still above the sky, it's day 6, but once the moment that it disappears and the brightness of the sun's orb ends up below that horizon, boom, we've entered day 7. And then the third option is not a moment in time, either one of those moments, but rather the process between those two moments, that process of the sun setting, starting when the sun's orb first touches the horizon, ending minutes later as the sun's orb disappears below the horizon. Or visual. All right, again, I'm using my own photos and I'm not set up. I didn't really do a sequence. Maybe I should have, but I didn't do a sequence. But I can get you an idea. So this would be in the process that I'm talking about. The sun is above the horizon here, and it's going to go below. But when we touch, then we go through a period of time. And let me see if I can get an example here where the sun is... Okay, so the sun has, in this photo, gone. It's obviously the orb is no longer above the horizon or just touching the horizon. It's in the process of moving behind the horizon. So what are we, about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes into the sunset here where it's going past? So this would be part of the process. And then it would end up with something like that. Oops, maybe that's still in the process. See if this one gets us. Okay, here's one. See if this one does a decent job. Okay, it's still going down. Maybe the sun has gone below the horizon there. Certainly here, it's gone below the horizon. So the whole thing becomes a process. So those are the 3 options. The moment that the sun's orb touches the horizon, the moment that the sun's orb disappears below the horizon, or that process from when it touches the horizon until it goes below the horizon. Let me see if I can illustrate this. This doesn't work for everybody, and I'm a little surprised, but see if I can make it work here now. So this is I mean, it's not a day. I mean, clearly we're using a circle to illustrate a 24-hour day. And just to see if I can explain it, here would be a sunrise, and this is at the moment this. Here, let me horizon. This line that splits the circle in half is considered the horizon. And if you follow over here, this is the sun, and it has not yet broken the horizon. So this would actually be, okay, this would be the sunrise, but let's follow it around all the way through. This would be like high noon of the day right here. This would be 9 o'clock, 3 p.m. And then we're approaching sundown. And the options that we just talked about would be, if this illustration, I just tried to draw a sun, let's say it's touching the horizon here. That would be one option. Or the other option is their illustration where the sun has just gone below the horizon. That would be an option for a evening. Or you have this 3 to 6 minute process where it's going down. The sun sets. It's the process of setting. Those are the 3 options that I believe we have seen, or that are the options that are available to us. Okay, now let's go ahead and define morning, but I'll try not to take as much time because really I don't need the photos again. You can imagine it in reverse. But morning is colloquially a period of time that could start as early as 12:01 a.m. If we're working with the Greco-Roman calendar, that's when it starts. So it could be all those early morning hours, 12:01 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5, early morning hours. That could be part of the morning. And then we could carry it all the way through all of the morning hours, like 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., all the way to 11:59 a.m. And then at noon, 12 p.m., we enter afternoon. So, when at our office, we say good morning until 11:59, at which time we start saying at noon, we start saying good afternoon. colloquially, that's what most people understand to be morning, and that's fine, but doesn't it doesn't help us in this discussion. We can't have that definition of morning defining when the day ends or begins either. So I'll just read this quickly. Colloquially, morning usually includes an extended period of time that begins with the appearance of light or twilight before the sun breaks the horizon and could run all the way until the sun reaches its apex at noon. But for the defining of the end of a day, we need to be more specific. Now, let me just also say, I know I didn't write it here, but we could colloquially talk about even before the sun is approaching the horizon. So here are the options for us, to define when morning begins. We could say it's when the morning's, the moment that the sun's orb moves from complete obscurity below the horizon and breaks the horizon, becoming first and partly visible, but still mostly obscure. So if we go back to this image here, here's the morning. We're talking about at this point in time, the sun is still below the horizon. See if I can erase that. So it's still below the horizon here, and that's what we're talking about. This would be the moment that the sun is approaching and getting ready to break the horizon. That could be morning. Next option would be the moment the sun's orb has risen past the horizon and becomes fully visible and completely unobscured. And that would look like if we were on this visual. Once it has come up and now it's above the horizon. Now I think this comes into play with in one of the topics that I'll be getting into in another video when we're talking about the orb of the sun appearing above the horizon. But anyway, those are one option, another option. But we have the third option, which I'm going to read in a second, but it's that same process in reverse. It's the process of the sun rising from the moment it's completely obscured, working its way to complete unobscurity. And that would be our third option here, the process of the sun's rising when the first vestige of the sun appears and ending minutes later when the entire sun orb is above the horizon. So just quickly again, these are the three. It's when the sun's orb is still completely below the horizon, but is breaking the horizon, getting ready to break the horizon. That could be the moment in time. Or the moment that the sun's orb has risen past the horizon and becomes fully visible and completely unobscured. Or it could be the entire process of a sun's rising when the first vestige of the sun appears. And minutes later when the sun's entire orbit is above the horizon. Now, I suppose it's possible, I didn't include it in here, but I suppose somebody could take any particular moment during the sun setting process or the sun rising process, rather than take the whole 3 to 6 or however many minutes it is, rather than take the whole process. Maybe they're going to stop when the sun's halfway between the two. You could do that. I mean, we could do those. We could do those types of scenarios over and over again, but it's effectively captured by what we're describing here. Now, I'm going to introduce here, it's really the word daybreak, and I could not find its equivalence in the evening. I'm sure there's a word out there, but I can't find its equivalence for it. But daybreak is often used in Scripture. At daybreak, they this, and at daybreak, they did that. Well, what does daybreak mean? I think many of us think daybreak is when the sun begins to appear above the horizon, the first vestige of the sun. It would be this, the moment that the sun moves from complete obscurity, breaks the horizon, and that would seem to be daybreak. Seems good. But when I look up the definition of daybreak, it really reads the time in the morning when daylight first appears, which would then be morning, twilight, or dawn. To go back to my visual here, that would be, here is dawn, which is, and just to define dawn, I guess I need to define dawn. We have night, we have darkness. There's no sunlight entering the sky. But at dawn, as the sun is approaching, its rays begin to impact the sky. And the moment it does, that's called dawn. And we start having some sunlight enter into the sky. And all that whole period of time between the first appearance of sunlight in the sky And until the sun actually breaks the sky, all of that's called twilight. So in the morning we have a dawn, and then twilight, and then the sunrise. And I think that's worth mentioning, even though it's not necessary. Well, actually, it is part of this because in another video I plan to talk about Genesis 1 because we're going to have to talk about, then there was evening and then there was morning. What does that mean? So it may come into play there as well. Okay, so the assertion is out there that a day runs evening to evening, and there's an assertion that not only are they inferring that or suggesting that it's implicit, many are saying or some are saying anyway, that it's ordained that it's evening to evening. I don't know if anybody should go so far as to say it's explicitly taught that way because I haven't found explicit teaching anywhere in the scripture about when a day begins and ends. And I plan to do a video about what that means, explicit versus implicit versus inferred. So let's visit this illustration of what it means to have a from evening to evening day. First of all, the day has to start at evening and it would run through the day and then it would start over again at evening. Now, I'm going to make this comment. Every 24-hour period of time, every day of every calendar, it can have only one evening and one morning and one day. It cannot have 2 evenings. It cannot have 2 mornings and it cannot have 2 days. Nobody's trying to say 2 mornings. Nobody's trying to say 2 days. But I do think that many are trying to introduce a second definition of what an evening could be. So that's why I'm making this comment. Every 24-hour period or day and every calendar day can have only one evening, one morning, and one day. I suppose people can argue with me if they want to, but they're going to have to show me how they get there and still define evening as the start of the day if you're going to end up, and I'll just quickly say here, they're going to start talking about it being the end of the day because they have to in order to make their position work in some of the scriptures that we work with. And then evening to evening has the potential to mislead, suggesting that one day can both start with an evening and end with an evening. Okay, the reason that I'm saying this is that's common. First of all, they grab it from Leviticus 23:32, where it says at evening, and then from evening to evening. And then that becomes from evening to evening or evening to evening becomes the way that we're describing this day. But just by using the term evening to evening would potentially be misleading because that's suggesting you can have 2, an evening to start the day and an evening to end the day. But really what I would say would be more appropriate to describe what they're trying to say is that we have an evening to an evening to end of the daylight time period before the evening starts, because whatever you use to start the day is going to start the next day as well. And if that is evening, if you just used whatever you're going to define as evening to start the day before, it needs to be what starts the new day and not also be what ends the day before. Okay. If we go from a morning to morning illustration, the day starts in the morning and runs through the night, and then starts over again at morning, and every 24-hour period of time, and every calendar day can have only one day, evening and morning. So let's look at what this would look like on a timeline. So here is we have these evening. Let me see if I can build this for you so you can understand this timeline, and if you need to pause or something to make sure you can follow what I'm saying, okay. But in this evening to evening illustration where the day starts at evening and runs through the day starting over to evening, the first thing that happens is evening over here. And this is this illustration here, and here's evening here. And then we have this 12-hour period of time. We first have the twilight. Once the evening has occurred, we have a twilight period. Then we have night. And then we have morning or daybreak or twilight, whatever it is, it's twilight for sure. This would be the twilight period. where the sun is approaching the horizon. First we have astronomical twilight, then we have nautical twilight, then we have civil twilight, but then we have morning here. I'm going to say actually sunrise. Let's call that sunrise because that's when the sun has broken the sky and now we have daylight beginning. Admittedly, first daylight is not as bright as it becomes later in the day, but this would be the beginning of the day in that moment. And then we have this period of time. First of all, let me come back here. This whole night process, this twilight period in the evening and the twilight period in the morning combined with the night is a 12-hour process. When we get to the day and the day breaks, we have a 12-hour process, but the 12-hour process runs all the way to evening again. So we have, first thing we have is the first 12-hour process we have in an evening to evening timeline is evening here. Sorry. And then you have morning here. And what would that be? That would be, we could get into different things, but here is our sunrise. And then we have 12 full hours of daylight, sunlight. And then we begin with an evening again. Now I'm going to use this place right here to do my illustrations of these options up here. The first option that I gave you was the moment the sun's entire orb touches the horizon. So when would that be? Let's see if I can draw a circle for a sun. So it'd be that. Here the sun has been traversing the entire day. Here's high noon, right? Oops, forgive me. There's high noon here. And then we have the afternoon hours that we would colloquially call them. And then the sun approaches the horizon and touches the horizon. But it's not set yet. It touched it. That's one option for when the day begins. Okay. The second option would be when the sun then, first of all, and let me go back up here to the first option. None of the sun is yet obscured. As it touches the horizon, it's completely visible. None of it's obscured. It's getting ready to start becoming obscured, but it's not obscured yet. In the second option that I'm suggesting, the entire sun's orb has, the sun's entire orb now has traversed past the horizon and has, the last vestige of its light has dipped below the horizon, and we've lost now complete visibility of the sun, and it's completely, in the moment that it completely becomes obscured, and that would be represented here. And I think that's what most people think of and probably operate from when they're trying to celebrate and honor the Sabbath, and they think they need to start it on a Friday evening. They're probably starting it using the sun down. As soon as the sun has set, not setting, not the whole process of the sunset, but once the sun has set. That's I think what most people use, but I guess that doesn't. I guess I don't know that. Maybe I shouldn't even say that. The third option is this whole process. It touches the horizon, and this is called, most of us call this the sunset. We watch it, and the entire process as we watch it and we look at it. I'm sorry, I'm looking west if you can't tell. The entire process, when it touches this horizon and then we watch it go down, that 3 to 5 minutes, we often call that sunset because that's what's happening. But that's a 3 to 5 minute period of time, and that is here. That is another option. But that would make a process. That would make 3 to 5 or 6 or whatever that time period is that it takes for the sun to go down, the start of the day rather than a moment in time. And I think that could, it seems like that would suggest problems. I think that would create problems because it's not a moment in time and you don't know. You would really potentially have confusion as, while the sun's setting to know what day you're on if we're not careful with that. But those are the three options. When we get to the morning, and I'll just show you here quickly, the morning would look like, here is dawn, and the sun is approaching, and suddenly we're getting some sunlight touching, coming into the sky, and this is what the definition of daybreak is, this period of time here. This whole twilight period would be daybreak. Sorry. Terrible writing, but I'm using a mouse. Okay, so this whole process here is daybreak, but we would also call that twilight. Okay. And then here is where the sun breaks. I'm sorry. Here's where it touches the sky right here. That's one option. And then there's another option. We got the process when it's coming past, through the horizon. And then you have another option when the sun has reached the top of the horizon. So there is an illustration of those three options. Now I'm going to move down and just because I've got another illustration of from morning to morning, which now I'm sorry. I thought maybe I had reworked this here, but it's not. So I'm going to eliminate. I'll just tell you that this whole part down here, you can just, if you've been seeing it and noticing it, please disregard it. It's just the same thing as up here. And it's not necessary for describing what an evening. Just to finish this video, that's the essence. We need to define when an evening begins. Whether it's going to be, I'm not going to repeat it, but we need to define when an evening begins and when a morning begins. That's foundational to the discussion. Now I'm going to end this video, but it is my intention to move on to another video where we apply these definitions to the Sabbath day and how the Sabbath day would look using these two options. So with that, may you be Baruch.